Hello, my friends. It is time once again to believe. Hi, welcome back to this week's edition of The Greatest Record Ever Made. I'm Carl Caffarelli, the co-host of This is Rock and Roll Radio with Dana and Carl. Heard every Sunday night from 9 to midnight Eastern right here in Syracuse on Spark, WSPJ 103.3 and 93.7 FM, and also on the web at sparksyracuse.org. And I'm also a writer. I've been working on a book called The Greatest Record Ever Made, Volume 1, dedicated to the notion that an infinite number of songs can each be the greatest record ever made as long as they take turns. And that's what they do. Their records, they take turns. This week's greatest record ever made spotlight falls on what some may think an unlikely subject, and that would be Yesterday by the Beatles. Classic record. Some people love it. Some people hate it. It may be the most recorded, most performed song in the history of popular music. If not, it's certainly a contender for that title. And many people don't like it. They view it as certainly not rock and roll. It's rock and roll, sort of, but maybe not rock and roll in the sense that we think of it. But I do insist that it is a great record that is underrated. And this is what I have to say about it in the book. The Beatles, Yesterday, written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Really, just Paul McCartney. Produced by George Martin from the album Help, Parlophone, in the United Kingdom, 1965. You think you know the song. You're sure you know the song. But I'm not certain that you do. Oh, you've heard it, of course. You've heard it more times than you can count. Maybe you still like it. Maybe you're sick of it. Maybe you never really liked it to begin with. You may be among those who've dismissed it as schmaltzy or shallow, as wallpaper. If the latter, then it's possible that you don't know the song, even after a million spins. You don't believe in Yesterday. In 1965, even as the Beatles solidified their hold on international pop culture, much of the adult establishment still viewed them as a silly novelty, a blight, an aberration that would pass none too soon, when the crazy kids would finally stop with all the swooning and the shaggy hair and the loud electrified nonsense and embrace mainstream, dignified pop sounds like Perry Como or Mantovani. The previous year, no less an embodiment of cool than James Bond, played by Sean Connery in the film Goldfinger, equipped that sipping a too warm glass of Dom Perignon was as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs. 007 thought the Beatles were kid stuff. Grow up already, you loutish children. In the introduction to an interview with the Beatles in the February 1965 issue of Playboy, don't pay attention to the girl, please. Writer Gene Shepard notes, they are not prodigious talents by any yardstick, but like hula hoops and yo-yos, they are at the right place at the right time. And whatever it is that triggers the mass hysteria of fads has made them walking legends. And Shepard probably meant that as a compliment. An adult could perhaps marvel at the Beatles' wit and resourcefulness, but one couldn't possibly take their music seriously. Not if one was old enough to reason, to vote, to drink, or to look at nude models in Playboy. The world was run by men, not by frivolous little boys and girls warbling along to I Want to Hold Your Hand. Cracks were beginning to appear in this condescending facade of the dull and the gray. Critics adored the Beatles' film debut in 1964's A Hard Day's Night, and some were starting to express appreciation of the music. The fad had already lasted longer than expected, and it showed no immediate sign of slipping into the twilight limbo of raccoon coats, zoot suits, and Davy Crockett coonskin caps. The Beatles couldn't last, could they? But nor were they going away anytime soon. A Hard Day's Night served as the Beatles' first acknowledged claim to being greater than four shaggy flashes in a pan. Yesterday was the second. It's not even a Beatles record. It's not even a rock and roll record. It's Paul McCartney crooning the sad song of the discarded lover as a string quartet stands primly in place of John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. The Beatles had done ballads before and dabbled in covers of older demographic material like A Taste of Honey, Until There Was You, the latter introduced in concert by Lennon as from the film The Muscle Man. In that sense, Yesterday wasn't quite as out of the blue as, say, saccharine strings backing the Ramones on a tepid cover of the Crystals' Baby I Love You at the end of the 70s. Nonetheless, yesterday was unprecedented in Beatles canon. It's mature. That's not a knock against the Beatles product that came before it. I adore that stuff more than anything else I've ever heard. But a recognition of how yesterday upped the ante of the Beatles' stardom. Adults couldn't dismiss this as noise, as pimply hyperbole twanged and thumped on guitars, bass, and drums. It was an instant pop standard. After its release, few could continue to deny that maybe the Beatles might stick around for a little while. It's said that McCartney wrote the melody in his sleep, woke up, fell out of bed, skipped the dragging of a comb across his head, to commit the tune to permanence, adding placeholder lines about scrambled eggs, baby how I love your legs. The real words came later. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. I believe in yesterday. You think this is schmaltz? You're not paying attention. This is the all-time kingpin of heartbreak songs. It's only seemingly casual sorrow, more than the equal of any lost love lament you can name, from George Jones to Joy Division. The chamber music backing our Paul is elegant and tasteful, never straying into the syrupy morass of the overwrought or overly sentimental. Mass acceptance and pan-generational popularity do nothing to dilute the record's power. This is pain made pretty, and all the more effective for it. Producer George Martin suggested the arrangement. McCartney was reluctant, the other Beatles skeptical, but it was the right choice. In England, yesterday was just another track on the Help album. In America, the suits at Capitol Records sensed the inevitable windfall profit of releasing it as a single. Yesterday spent 4 weeks at #1 in Billboard and went on to be one of the most played and most covered songs of the rock and roll era. A Hard Day's Night, Yesterday, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and more, alongside an eternally beguiling passel of pop tunes before, during, and after. Kid stuff? A freaking fad? The long and winding road left that quaint notion in the dust. And I still recall a tear-stained evening decades ago, sitting in my room, sipping, slurping beer, trying to wash away my own broken heart, and listening to Paul McCartney long for Yesterday. The beer was at room temperature. James Bond would not have approved of my beverage or my soundtrack. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. Better tomorrows were on the horizon. We still believe in yesterday. I understand there's another cover to this album. Rumor has it. Thank you for joining me this week for the greatest record ever made. Below, you will see options to tip and to support and to subscribe, which I hope that you will take advantage of. And we'll be back next week for another exciting episode of the greatest record ever made. Thank you for joining me.